I stand here terrified. And I am here to talk about it. Yes, as masochistic as it sounds, I am here to talk about anxiety and how leaning into that horrible feeling, a feeling I have run away from most of my life, helped me build a bridge out of suicidal isolation. In the next 18 minutes, I'm going to talk you through how I built that bridge, truss by truss. I will talk about purpose, hope, exposure therapy, commitment, and transparent vulnerability. My hope is this will serve as a blueprint for others with anxiety and depression, and maybe even help some of you. My bridge began with someone who could not be here today, my best friend, Maura. During my 19th psychiatric hospitalization, after my only suicide attempt, Maura sat me down, squeezing my hands until they hurt. She said, Kate, you must promise me. You must promise me you will always keep fighting, that you will always keep sharing your story so that one day you can find the light. And I believe when you do, yes, when you do, you will give a TED Talk like our favorite, Brené Brown. We both laughed out loud. We were both in a locked psychiatric ward for suicide attempts. So yes, her comment seemed beyond outlandish. But as crazy as it sounded, I still promised her I would. I promised her I would keep fighting and keep sharing my story for sake of others. The next day, Maura signed out of the ward AMA, against medical advice. She went home, and that night she died. The newspaper called it a suicide, but I will always call it a death by illness, because that is what it was. After her death, I clung to that promise, to that purpose. And I present it to you today as the first truss of my bridge. Maura, I miss you every day. Thank you. I dedicate this talk to you. My darkness began long before that hospitalization. Truthfully, my darkness, manifesting in the form of crippling anxiety, began in my childhood. Back then, to avoid the horrible feeling of legs quaking, heart jumping out of my chest, mind racing past comprehension, I ate. Marshmallows, chocolate chips, Vienna fingers, anything I could get my hands on. I stuffed them in my mouth. I tried to suffocate my darkness with food. That was my first maladaptive coping strategy, and many others followed. In middle school, I tried restrictive eating. In high school, I tried bulimia. And at 18, after the diagnosis of bipolar disorder, more coping strategies followed suit. Some were prescribed, others were not. These included trying 20 different types of medications to numb the feeling of anxiety, undergoing electroconvulsive therapy to shock it out of me, over-exercising to run away from it, cutting my arms to excise it from my body, washing it away with bleach and endless showers, ritualizing away in protocols repeated in careful sets of 3. And then, when none of these made me feel any bit better, I strove to perfect a suicide plan, the ultimate act to escape it. All in all, none of these strategies alleviated my anxiety, my darkness, or made my life any bit more manageable. By age 26, so consumed by obsessive-compulsive disorder, medication-induced hallucinations, isolation, and suicidality, I was placed on psychiatric disability. Shortly thereafter, it was recommended I move to a long-term inpatient psychiatric facility for the rest of my life. I remember when the crisis care team told me this, that I was out of options except to be permanently hospitalized. I felt truly hopeless, and when I went back to my room, I wrote in my journal, now this is rock bottom. When my parents, two well-connected health professionals, learned of this recommendation, desperate for one final alternative, they got me an appointment with the only doctor willing to see me. Before my appointment with this doctor, Dr. C, I was terrified. Not only had I heard rumors in the wards of how absolutely intense this man was, but I also knew it was the only thing, appointments with him were the only thing standing between me and living my life out behind a locked door. That first day, he barely said hello before beginning. Kate, he said in his typical deadpan delivery, the basis of our work here, it is simple. It is up to you. I laughed in his face, just like I had done when Maura thought I'd give a TED Talk. No, doctor, you must be mistaken. It can't be up to me. I am doomed to a ward. So how are you going to save me when no one else could? He paused and cracked the first and only smile of the session and responded, oh, Kate, I'm not going to save you. I am only going to teach you. It is up to you whether you decide to learn and work and grow and save yourself. Now, that's all for today. I'll see you tomorrow morning, bright and early. That night in my journal, I wrote profanities galore about this. Work? You want me to do work? I thought my illness was enough work. And I also wrote that for the first time, yes, the first time in a decade, a doctor believed I was worthy enough, I was capable enough to show up. And that felt like hope. Even though I did not know it at the time, I built my second truss of the bridge that evening, the truss of hope. At my second appointment, Dr. C introduced the method of exposure therapy, and I will present this as the third truss of my bridge. Wasting no time on pleasantries, he dove in. So Kate, I will admit it, exposure therapy is hard work, but it has proven to be very effective with people who struggle with anxiety and depression, just like yourself. The underlying principle, it is quite simple. You, the patient, will expose yourself to the very stimuli that scare you. By exposing yourself to the situations that you are threatened by, you will slowly change neurological pathways in your brain, and over time, diminish your response to them. In short, by doing exactly what you fear, you will teach your body that you can handle it. Panic ensued. You mean you want me to do what I am terrified of? Last time I checked, you were here to help me. Are you out of your mind? He was unaffected by my outburst. Yes, Kate, precisely. Now for homework, please write out a list of all of your fears, and thereafter please rank them from least fear-inducing to most fear-inducing. At my next session, I proudly presented Dr. C with 13 single-spaced pages of my fears. Yes, ranked and typed to perfection. He was unimpressed. Okay, Kate, so now that we have this list, which we will call your hierarchy, we will tackle everything on this list with an exposure. My mind raced. This is what I had feared. I wanted to run, to hide, to do anything but this. But then I remembered it was him or the ward. Yes, him or the ward. So I stayed. And Dr. C began to talk me through my first exposure, the act of leaving my apartment. The mere mention of it, I burst into tears and in sobs proclaimed, this task is just too great. Intrigued by the arrival of tears, Dr. C asked me what I meant. I paused. I reminded myself that yes, it was him or the ward, and then I laid it all out. Dr. C, when I do anything I'm scared of, I have an accident. To be blunt, when I do anything I'm scared of, I am scared shitless. Dr. C, God bless his soul, did not even bat an eye. Well, that must be difficult. So let's get you a book with let's get you on the books with a GI specialist, and in the interim, how about some adult diapers? I paused. I reminded myself again, it was him or the ward. And then I chose him and the work and the diapers, and I never looked back. And that day, yes, that day, I built my fourth truss, the truss of commitment. I've worn those peach-colored, excessively poofy panties more days than I would like to admit. But today, thanks to my bridge, I stand here without them. Nevertheless, for that first exposure, I sure needed them. The first exposure consisted of me leaving my apartment for the parking lot behind it. Each day, I would leave my apartment and I would stand beside my building's dumpster, feeling my anxiety, legs quaking, heart racing, sweat dripping down my chest and pooling, literally pooling in my belly button. I stood there, feeling my fear. I stood there exposing myself to the world. I did this for 2 weeks, and then my neighbors called security. When I told the security officers to back up, I'm growing, they were so confused, they actually left me alone. And thus, my exposures continued. After 4 weeks of standing beside my dumpster in my apartment's parking lot, my anxiety started to dissipate. And by week 6, I felt no fear whatsoever leaving my apartment. I remember the appointment after that. After I had seen exposure therapy work, I walked into Dr. C and announced, I will no longer die by suicide or behind a locked door because you were right. I am the solution, and I have the power to grow. And thereafter, fueled by this living proof of efficacy, I continued my exposures. I added walking into town. I added walking through town. I added sitting in public spaces and being seen. And 4 months later, I added talking to people. One of those people was a distant friend from high school. And given my list had inviting someone to supper upon it, I asked her to dinner. The night of, I panicked. What do people even talk about at a dinner party? I hurriedly Googled how to host a dinner party and ask good questions. Yet, upon her arrival, instead of using my list of questions generated by the internet, I allowed myself to be vulnerable. I told her my story. Pain, 21 psychiatric hospitalizations. The recent realization by my doctor that I did not, in fact, even have bipolar disorder. A life of crippling anxiety. It wasn't comfortable. Anxiety pulsed through my body the whole time. And yet, instead of the anticipated stigma, my friend offered kindness. My friend offered community. And that night, I built my fifth and final trust, transparent vulnerability. My exposure work continued, and exposure after exposure, I slowly grew out of isolation and built a new life. One of gratitude, friends, family, a loving boyfriend, and a meaningful job. A life neither I nor any doctor could ever have dreamed of for me. And over the last 3 years, through storytelling, writing online, and posting on social media, I have made good on my promise to Maura. And in doing so, I have discovered that transparent vulnerability, this fifth and final trust, is the most critical trust of my bridge. For it is the trust that brought me community, understanding, and true acceptance of who I am. When I started sharing, just as I did with exposure therapy, I did so slowly and gently. First, I shared about my depression. Then I shared about my obsessive compulsive disorder. And then finally, so buoyed by the support of my raw honesty and openness, I talked about my suicide attempt and my gratitude for surviving it. The day after disclosing my suicide attempt, a note arrived in my inbox. It read, "And then I found you. You share everything, your highs, your lows, your work for wellness, your exhaustion, your elation, your sorrow, and how it all informs and creates your gratitude. I don't have anything to offer you except to say thanks. Please know that your transparent vulnerability, as you call it, it stopped me from pulling the trigger." That was when I knew. I had not only built a bridge out of darkness for myself, I had built a bridge for others. I have been talking now for 15 minutes, and during that time, 25 people died by way of suicide on this planet. I am heartbroken by that. And I also stand before you today full of hope. For I now know that there is a way out of that darkness. Yes, for those of us with anxiety, it may resemble this bridge behind me with these 5 trusses. But for the rest of the world, those unaffected, it is a bridge built of one principle and one principle alone, the principle of transparent vulnerability and the acceptance of it. Today, I stand here asking you for that, to share your vulnerability and to accept with kindness when others do the same. Because if we do that, if the whole world celebrates the truth that pain and joy coexist, we will build a bridge to a place where we all belong. And that is my hope. My hope is to build a bridge to a place where people like Maura will not leave the world behind with notes that read, "I just don't belong." So here is to us taking that brave step, that courageous step to show up in our pain and grow in our discomfort. Here is to that bridge, into that world we are going to build because of it. I cannot wait to see you there.